In our previous two episodes, we outlined the essential role that school nurses play in helping students with severe allergies avoid anaphylaxis. And we showed you what a successful collaboration between a parent and school nurse looks like. But what if the efforts to avoid an accidental exposure fail and you have an emergency situation at hand? Hello, I'm Tia Campbell, Vice President of the National Association of School Nurses. Welcome to the third program in our three-part series. In this final episode, we're going to explore how school nurses lead and coordinate emergency response during an anaphylaxis event. And we'll take a look at a model district-wide program that is in practice today. But before we get started, feel free to email any questions to our guest or the NASN team at any time at the address below, and we'll get back to you shortly. Joining me today is Sally Schessler, school nurse and architect of district-wide anaphylaxis emergency response plans for several school districts in New York State. Currently, Sally is the Director of Nursing Education at NASN. Thanks for joining us, Sally.
It's my pleasure.
You've worked in this field for a long time, and you have a lot of experience with managing anaphylaxis in the school setting and with developing a district-wide response plan. Can you tell us about that response plan?
Well, it's important, I think, to always keep in mind that you never know what any one emergency is going to look like. So the really important thing is to put in strong lines of communication into any protocols and plans that you're developing. It's great to have administrative support from your principal, and very often the school district has protocols and policies in place. We'll talk about where you can find information about that later. But it's important to have that administrative support because you need to make sure that your staff is trained and ready to go in the event of an emergency.
So can you give us some insight, that inside view of how this works in the school district?
Well, basically, the whole school community is a team, and you need to make sure that you have a team effort set up to care for children that might have a life-threatening event at school. It's important that staff is educated and well-trained, and because when they are less anxious, we're going to have a more positive outcome in the event that an emergency occurs. The school nurse is an obvious leader for this kind of an effort at school and can work to make sure that there's an emergency care plan in place for the student. We certainly wrote an emergency care plan for any student that had an order for an epinephrine auto-injector at school. And we want to make sure that everybody knows what their role is, and because that's going to reduce anxiety, and that's just going to be what's so much better for our students in the event that there is an emergency.
So how do you notify, say, parents, administrators, the emergency services personnel if there actually is an event?
I think it's important to make sure that you're not only having sound planning, but that you are prepared as well. One thing we did very often is that we would have a strong plan in place, but then we would do tabletop drills to make sure that everybody knew where they were going and what their role was. In one school I worked in, it was like a well-orchestrated machine. If there was an event, the teacher would call the health office. We'd have a assistant principal would come and cover the health office while I responded with my two-way radio to the emergency. Meanwhile, the principal would pick up the students' emergency information and head to the site of the incident. We'd worked hard to figure out whose roles should be what, and we worked really hard. Because again, it does take a complete team. Our food service people took care of our student at lunch to make sure that everything that they had to eat was appropriate. The counselor would come to the site of an incident and take care of all the other children because certainly they're experiencing something and no emergency is going to happen in a vacuum. So it's really important to think about all the different components. And the other thing is that not only is every emergency unique, but every school community is unique. Everybody has a different staffing model in their buildings. Some buildings are spread out on one story, some are very compact and on multiple stories. In some, the health office is located in a central area, and in some, it's way out on a wing. So you have to make sure that your district plan is very unique to your specific situation.
I understand that not all emergency responders, the folks you call the rescue squad, not all of those are equipped with epinephrine. So how do you address that?
Well, that's an important thing to address ahead of time. And I talk about, the planning and preparation part. Some states have state laws that they must carry epinephrine, but I know that some states don't. And so it's great to plan ahead, and the school nurse can interface with emergency medical services in the community to ask, what's the protocol to get epinephrine there? And in some areas, when you call the ambulance, then you need to request advanced life support in order to get the epinephrine to the school. Now, whoever's making that call needs to know that. And again, that's part of this really good planning and thinking about every contingency in your specific setting.
Good advice. So practically, Sally, how does one school nurse who has 400 students manage a response plan?
Well, school nurses very often have many more than 400 students that they're responsible for, and very often they have multiple buildings they're responsible for. So it really is an issue, and again, it's that unique setting. But school nurses write emergency care plans, and that really directs the plan of care to school staff. So if the school nurse isn't the one that can respond, they know what to do. Basically, we need to provide sound training for school nurses to train school staff, and that's one of NASN's current projects, and make sure that staff really knows what to do. And when they know what to do, they react calmly and they react with confidence, and we have really positive outcomes for students.
That's where those drills, planning, the tabletop exercises really come into play.
It works really well to write up a scenario and take some time with school staff to really practice, and say, okay, here's the scenario. Now everybody goes around the table and says, what is my role? Where am I going to be, and what am I going to do? And it does reduce anxiety.
A lot.
A lot.
So Sally, tell us, how does the school nurse communicate this plan to teachers, to parents, maybe even to visitors?
Well, when we're talking about the specific information of how a staff member should respond to a child that's having an anaphylactic reaction, that emergency care plan is going to be a key communication tool. It's going to be written in lay language, not in nurse language, and it's going to say, if you see this, you're going to do this. And it's very simple. I always think about somebody holding a piece of paper and having it shake, and I want to be writing an emergency care plan that is so easy that they can just follow it no matter what they're experiencing as well. When it comes to the rest of the school community, faculty meetings are a great place to discuss the signs and symptoms of anaphylaxis. I certainly had one-on-one meetings with food service directors. And again, if the principal is very committed to making sure that this word is spread and this is a priority for the school community, it's really going to happen. And I think it's a great way. You can go to the PTA meetings and talk to parents. One school I was at, the school nurses actually held a parent meeting for the parents one night and had them come in, and we talked about what we do in the school for food allergies, but also the food service director came. And that was kind of a magical day because the parents could talk directly to the food service director who told them all the foods that were safe for their children. And it really made a difference. But again, those open lines of communication should be a priority when it comes to anaphylaxis management.
And a great example of the collaboration it takes to coordinate those efforts, not just school health, but administration, parents, and your nutrition staff.
Absolutely.
Very important.
Absolutely.
Medication management is a big issue around this event. And so tell me something that school nurses need to know and families need to know about how medication is managed in the school setting.
Well, first of all, it's a priority that parents bring the medication to the school. Sometimes it amazes me how there's some lapse in that. And so we need to, as we work on emergency care plans, make sure that parents have the medication and the appropriate parental and physician or prescriber permissions available. Epinephrine would be in the school health office. There's some issue, and again, we're going to talk a lot about state to state. Rules and regulations are different. Practice is different. But in some states, all medications need to be locked up. I think it works pretty well if you're in a situation where you can have your epinephrine in a safe location that's unlocked. You want it where you can respond quickly and easily. So you want to make sure that you have a mechanism in place to note the expiration date of medications. So again, you want the medication accessible, but safe, because certainly too in the elementary setting you want to make sure that probing little fingers are not able to get to the epinephrine, but again you want it accessible for anyone that would need it in an emergency.
How do you decide when someone who has symptoms, how do you decide when they're transported to a hospital?
I think any time an epinephrine auto-injector is given at school, that student needs to go to the hospital. So if you're giving an epinephrine auto-injector, 911 should be called. And because very often a child can have a resurgence of symptoms or what's called a biphasic reaction, where hours later, without any other exposure, they can have another full-blown episode of anaphylaxis. So it's incredibly important that they go and they get emergency medical treatment. Sometimes a parent will say, oh, don't worry, I'll drive them to the hospital. And one of my fears with that is always, what happens if they get halfway there and their child has another reaction? Certainly you want to keep the parent and the child safe. So I think 911 is the best call right after the auto-injector is given.
And when you do use an auto-injector, is it important that that packaging go with the student to the hospital?
Yes, you should always send the used auto-injector with the student to the hospital. That way the emergency staff knows what was given and they can dispose of it for you as well.
So as we get ready to close out, can you tell me some of your experience? What has it been with working with school nurses on this issue?
I think it's important, again, plan and prepare. You want to think about what you need to have in place. And I think one of the really important parts of that is having a strong relationship built not only with school administration, but also with parents. You want to make sure that you have that relationship in place, that they're going to trust you to take care of their child, and trust that you will, in an emergency, do the things that are appropriate and that will benefit their child. I would often have a parent help me with training staff. They would come in and they would teach staff to read food labels. I certainly think that the nurse would do the more medical part of the training, but a parent certainly can help teach how to read food labels. And nobody knows the child as well as the parent does. And they're spending their whole life, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, making sure that their child is safe and okay. And turning that trust over to the school is a very difficult thing. And I can really understand that. So I think once the school nurse realizes that building that trusting relationship and then planning, really sound planning, putting in those great lines of communication and helping school staff just to understand that when everybody works together and everybody collaborates, that's what helps children to be safe at school and helps with that emergency response in the event of anaphylaxis.
So if a school district or school division does not have a formal policy on anaphylaxis response, what would your advice be to parents?
There are a lot of great resources out there, Tia, and certainly at the National Association of School Nurses website, we have a strong section on tools and resources that has an algorithm for managing anaphylaxis, but we have checklists that talk about how to create a district policy. And certainly we have resources from other partners, national partners. The National School Boards Association has a great document on developing school policy for anaphylaxis management. But certainly if people want to go to www.nasn.org, look for tools and resources, and then look for food allergy and anaphylaxis, they're going to find a lot of things there that will help them along the way.
Thank you, Sally, for sharing your expertise and for sharing these resources with us today. Having a strong anaphylaxis action plan is just as important as having measures in place to avoid accidental exposures. And if you are a parent of a child with severe allergies, be sure to coordinate with your school nurse, as communication is essential. If you're a school nurse looking to develop or enhance a plan in your school or district, be sure to take advantage of our many resources and experts right here at NASN. If you have any questions for Sally or for the NASN team, email them to us at the address below, and we'll get back with you shortly. And please share this program with your community. We want to reach as many families and school personnel as possible. This is the final program in our series, but you can go back and watch any episode on demand right here. And don't forget to take advantage of the numerous downloadable resources below. On behalf of Sally and the entire NASN team, thanks for watching.